Hey everyone, Rho here. Today we're reviewing the novel The Wolftime by Gav Fulp. As always, this will be a spoiler-free review, followed by a little spoiler talk reaction at the end. Now I have been thinking about doing a more interactive live stream discussion for those of us that have read the book, so we can have more of a discussion together about these kind of things. So if you're interested in that, make sure to let me know in the comments. Okay, so obviously The Wolftime is part of the Dawn of Fire novel series, telling the tale of Guilliman's Indomitus crusade, filling in the blanks of the time period before the Dark Imperium trilogy. To sum up the setting of this book, Guilliman's fleets are crossing the stars in an attempt to save the Imperium from the grip of chaos. And to make matters worse, orcs are now taking the opportunity to cause devastation. And here in the middle of all this lies the Space Wolves chapter, severely outnumbered and suffering as they attempt to save world after world from darkness. With the news of Guilliman arriving, Grimnar is now faced with a decision of what would accepting Guilliman and his Primaris cost the chapter, and what would the consequences of saying no be. Now, as usual with these big series of novels, the story inside is made up of several alternate side stories, all contributing to the larger vision. Without going into spoiler territory, there are two main narratives that essentially drive this story, and they are the events concerning the leadership and direction of the Space Wolves chapter, revolving mainly around Logan Grimnar and his inner circle, and the other is following a Primaris Marine by the name of Gaius, who is an unnumbered Primaris Marine of Guilliman's Indomitus crusade. The important note of Gaius and his squad is that they are of course of Leman Russ's lineage. Now the great thing about a Space Wolf story is the sheer personality that you can instill in this cast of characters. The wolves of course about as colourful a chapter as you're ever going to meet. And to me, the author Gav Fulp did a great job of bringing them to life with that personality. Whether or not you agree with their decisions, they felt every inch alive and real people. And this was perfectly showcased to me by Gaius's journey throughout the novel. It's his journey that was the standout part of the book for me, and I really think Gav deserves credit for how this character evolves throughout the book. Gaius is a prototypical Primaris, a member of Guilliman's unnumbered sons. He's about as far away from a son of Russ as could be expected. Honestly, when I started reading, I was thinking there's no way this can be a Space Wolf. I mean, his name's Gaius. But that's exactly the point. This story makes you question just what it means to be a Space Wolf. Just what is a true son of Russ? And as Gaius searches for those answers, so too was I. Honestly, I appreciated it all the more on the second read, because it was then that I really began to appreciate the subtle changes and evolution of his character. I'd never really questioned just what it was like for a Primaris to come to a chapter of their blood. We've always just kind of taken it for granted, but really it's a momentous moment, especially for one so divergent from the standard archetypes such as the wolves. With Gaius's story, Gav not only makes you ask that question, but he also makes you want to find the answers. It was a really well written character arc for me. There were genuine points of Gaius's story that I found myself beaming with a smile or feeling genuinely sorry for him. And when you have a new character who can evoke those emotions from you, well, you know his story has done something right. It never felt too forced or too rushed. Throughout Gaius's entire story arc, I was fully immersed and right behind him. His story begins as just a generic Primaris, but man does it go on some kind of journey from there. And well, that question of just what it means to be a Space Wolf was equally as important to the main narrative of Grimnar and the chapter itself. Again, without going into specific spoilers, here we see a Grimnar who is not only desperately trying to hold back the tides of enemies, but also wrestling with a decision and event that no other Great Wolf has ever had to contend with. A returned Primarch, and a new Lord Commander in Reboot Guilliman, and of course along with him, his creations of the Primaris. Now I'm sure some people will probably read the story and disagree with some of the actions that Grimnar takes, and I don't disagree because there were parts that I was as well. However, I don't think that's wrong. I think that's a very real part of his story. Grimnar isn't supposed to be viewed as this infallible hero, a man who can do no wrong. Here is a man with the weight of history on his shoulders, a man struggling with that very same question as Gaius. Just what does it mean to be a space wolf? Let's keep in mind here, Grimnar doesn't have 1,000 other chapters sharing their blood. There is only one, and he is the only chapter master, or Great Wolf if you want to be specific. In him rests the legacy of his Primarch, and that is really no small amount of pressure. Now again, it was here on my second read through that I really began to appreciate and understand just what kind of position that Grimnar is in, and it really began to hit home how similar his and Gaius' stories are, right down to their very core. Both of these characters are wrestling with the same question, just from completely opposite ends of the spectrum. One who is yet to experience what it means to be a son of Russ, and the other who knows more than anyone else, and one who has their very identity itself weighing by his and only his decision. Now of course, in being a Warhammer 40k story, there is plenty of battles and action along the way, so fear not for those action fans amongst you. They are as good and as enjoyable as ever. However, honestly for me, the orcs and the battles took very much a backstory. It's the characters and situations that really carried the story over the action. And I guess that may not be a surprise for you that know me well. I found myself just wanting to get back to the conversations. You get plenty of sightings of major characters, from Guilliman himself to the obvious other Space Wolf Lords, and it's particularly nice when familiar names turn up within a story. Now there are a couple of smaller side stories concerning smaller characters, and they run along side by side with the main narratives. However, for me they weren't nearly as interesting as the main stories themselves, and I found myself just wanting to get back to Gaius or the main story with Grimnar. However, of course, this may just be due to the fact that obviously I am a major Space Wolf guy. So just keep in mind there are a couple of other side stories that you might find yourself enjoying. Overall for me, the Wolftime is a really enjoyable read, and one I probably would have given a 3 out of 5 on that first read, but I'm really happy I gave it a second read as well, really coming to terms and getting to grips with the story, because after that my score has easily gone up to a 4 out of 5. It's a really enjoyable read. Admittedly, I am a Space Wolf fan, so just keep that in mind and take it with a grain of salt. I may well enjoy this more so if you're not particularly a fan of the wolves. However, I really think this is one you can appreciate the dynamic between Gaius and Grimnar's stories. I think the author Gav Thorpe did a great job with Gaius in particular. It's a real unique look at the mental journey a Primaris has to go through, and once you appreciate the weight on Grimnar's shoulders, you really begin to understand just why he is taking the decisions that he is, even if they are on the face of them the absolute wrong decisions to make. Coming out of this book, I'd really love to see more of these type of stories, really focusing on other Primarch bloodlines and how the Primaris are adapting to them. More stories of all new chapters being founded by Primaris Marines. Say how the relationship with Azrael may evolve with any new Dark Angel successor chapters. Or say the Salamanders and their new Dark Kraken successors. 2 chapters of the same blood, but on vastly different worlds. However, that's it for the spoiler-free review. Now on to a little spoiler-specific talk for those of you that have already read it. Well, like I've said throughout, Gaius' story for me was the absolute star of this book, and I really did enjoy his and his squad's journey. When I was reading Gaius' first introduction, I was really thinking, is this guy supposed to be a space wolf? He doesn't sound anything like one. And I admit I was really wondering where this was going. But of course that was exactly the point. It really raises some great questions to me, like how much instinctually comes from the nature for a Primaris, in regards to their natural bloodlines. Having Gaius reading that book about the Space Wolves and Fenris just to learn more about them, that was such a great little touch. Having him learn something from the pages and then trying to put it into practice with his brothers, it was really nice to read. And I don't know if nice is maybe the right word to use there, but I think you understand my meaning. Something we have always felt was just simply their nature, because they were the blood of a certain Primarch. Yet here we get to see that everything they do doesn't come quite so naturally. Once they were with the chapters, watching Gaius' squad trying to paint the markings onto their armour, not having any idea what they were supposed to do, all these little moments just really added up to making Gaius' story so complete. And again, I really hope we get to see similar ones involving other bloodlines. Now, without a doubt, my absolute favourite moment and scene was Gaius' first meeting with the firstborn Space Wolves. Just the moment he was shouting across the combat trying to introduce himself, just happily stating that he's a Space Wolf as well. The innocence and eagerness in his words just leapt off the page. The firstborn can only reply with, "Oh, are you now?" I just couldn't help but smile imagining the scene. It was a moment of innocent humour that we so rarely get to see in this grimdark universe. And again, it really made me look at the Primaris of the Unnumbered Suns in a real new light. They may well be genetically engineered warriors and killers, but as strange as it sounds to say it, they also have a certain degree of naivety and innocence about them. And I really think it was that element that endeared me to Gaius and his brothers the most. Seeing him at the end standing there as a full brother of Fenris, it was the perfect end, and it really came with a great deal of satisfaction for the character. Obviously, Grimnar's tale is perhaps not quite so straightforward, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who at times was just thinking, Grimnar, what are you doing? But like I said earlier, I really don't think you're supposed to constantly agree with Grimnar. That's why we see even his own counsellors voicing their disagreement. And again, it's those disagreements that really pushed Grimnar into a corner, forcing him to take even more drastic action that I personally don't think he wanted to take. He was very much boxing himself into a corner. And like I said earlier, once I grasped that his story is essentially the same as Gaius's, just from that different perspective, it really helped me understand his motivations and decisions, even if at the end of the day I did disagree with them. You got the sense here that Grimnar was just desperate to have Russ return, to take that burden of responsibility away from him, and having Guilliman himself return. Unbelievably, it felt like a very real possibility to Grimnar. It was also really interesting viewing his perspective of Guilliman, and how even Grimnar doubted he'd be able to hold his nerve in front of him. It's an interesting perspective of a chapter master and a Primarch that we don't often get to see, and it was obviously quite a different meeting than the one that we saw Guilliman and Dante taking. Now, I was disappointed we didn't get any real length of conversation between Guilliman and Grimnar, because I admit I was just hoping to hear Guilliman talk about Russ, Much the same as I wished for sanguineous mentions with Guilliman's meeting of Dante, behind closed doors speaking about his brother to his descended sons. I also thought we may actually get one of the wolves asking Guilliman to relate a tale during the feast, but oh well, hopefully that will come down the line someday in a short story. For all my love of Gaius' story though, I have to admit the line of the book went to the Custodes. Being told instead to say wolves of Fenris instead of space wolves, only for him to reply with, "They don't belong to Fenris. They belong to the Emperor." Man, what a line that was. I'm not going to deny, I just marked out when he said that. It was an awesome line. The ultimate no coming back from comeback. I mean, there's just no answer to it, is there? If the Throne World says you're the Space Wolves, as decreed by the Emperor, then you're the Space Wolves. There's no discussion about it. And finally, the point I'll end on is Guilliman being referred to as the Legion Breaker, and how the grudges clearly felt very real still to the wolves, even referring to him stealing Rogel Dawn's power. While obviously their viewpoint is a little tainted, I do think this could well be the subtle truth to a larger, more precarious situation within the Scouring. We know it came very close to a civil war, but I think there may be well some more surprises within that story to come. Now how and when, I'm not so sure, as Russ is very much on record saying he simply didn't want to fight with his brothers anymore. So why Bjorn the Fell-Handed ends up with such a strong opinion, well, I'm very interested to see, because it's very differently to the one that Russ has when last we will see him. But as always, one thing's for sure, I can't wait to find out. But as always guys, what did you think? Were you as big a fan of Gaius' story as I was? And what did you think of Grimnar's decisions? Were you for them or were you against them? As always, leave your thoughts in the comments below, I love to read them. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. And if you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.